It was a bright, ordinary Saturday morning, and I was sitting in the front seat of my daughter Hannah's car with a trash bag in my hand. She had a long week ahead, and I had offered, the way a mother does, to take her car for the afternoon and have it cleaned out and serviced as a small surprise. The radio was off. The sun was coming through the windshield. I was reaching into the pocket of the driver's door, pulling out the small, soft clutter that collects there, an old parking stub, a hair tie, a stick of gum, when my fingers closed on a folded slip of paper, and I unfolded it the way you unfold anything, without thinking, expecting nothing. And then I sat very still in that sunlit car for a long time, because the ordinary little receipt in my hand had just quietly told me that my daughter had a secret, and that the secret was my mother. I want to stop on that image. A 56-year-old woman frozen in her daughter's car with a gas station receipt in her hand, because it is the precise moment a wall I had spent 25 years maintaining developed its first crack. My name is Sandra Holloway, though everyone has called me Sandy my whole life. I am 56 years old, and I run a small catering business here in Birmingham, Alabama. I have spent my career feeding other families' weddings and reunions and holidays. I am going to tell you what was on that receipt and where it led me. But first I have to tell you about my mother, and the wall, and the 25 years of silence I had always believed I was completely right to keep. My mother's name is Lorraine, and I am going to be careful and honest here, because the honesty is the whole foundation of this story, and a dishonest version would be worthless to you. I have heard too many of these stories told one of two false ways. Either the mother is made a cartoon monster, or the estrangement is waved away as a misunderstanding that never should have happened. Mine was neither. The hurt was real and the leaving was right, and the story I am about to tell you does not erase a word of that. It only adds a chapter that I did not know had been written. I did not cut my mother out of my life over nothing. I want to say that as plainly as I can. The mother who raised me was not a warm woman, and at her worst, she was more than just cold. She was sharp and belittling, and she had a way of making a child feel like a disappointment that took me well into my own adulthood to recover from. I grew up small in her house, and when I became a mother myself, in my late 20s, something in me hardened into a decision. I looked at my own small children, and I looked at my mother, and I decided that the particular damage that had been done to me was not going to get a second generation to work on. So, when Hannah was a toddler, after one last painful confrontation, I cut the cord. I stopped calling. I stopped visiting. I built a wall between Lorraine and the family I was making, and I told myself it was the bravest and most protective thing I had ever done. I want to tell you about the confrontation that ended it, because I have replayed it for 25 years. It was not a screaming match. My mother and I did not scream. That was never our way. It was worse than screaming. I had gone to her, with Hannah a toddler on my hip, to tell her, calmly, that some of the things she said to me and had started, just barely, to say in front of my daughter, had to stop. And my mother had not raised her voice. She had simply looked at me with that cool, assessing expression I had grown up under, and told me that I had always been too sensitive, that I was making something out of nothing, and that motherhood had apparently not cured me of my tendency to dramatize. And I stood there holding my own child, being told that the wound was my own invention, and something in me simply closed. I drove home, and I did not call her again, and for 25 years I believed that closing the door on a woman who would not even admit there was a wound was the only sane thing left to do. I still believe the young woman who made that choice was not wrong. I have only learned that being not wrong is not the same as being finished. For 25 years, that wall held, and I never seriously questioned it. And I want to tell you what it cost, because the cost was real, and I had simply decided the cost was worth paying. My children grew up essentially without a grandmother on my side. Hannah and her younger brother knew, in the vague way children know things, that my mother existed somewhere, and that we did not see her, and that the reasons were grown-up reasons, and not to be asked about. I did not poison them against Lorraine exactly. I was not cruel about her, but I made her a closed subject, a door in the house of our family that simply did not open. And I lived for a quarter of a century inside a clean, settled certainty. I had a mother who had hurt me. I had protected my children from her, and the silence between us was a wound I had cauterized on purpose, a long time ago, and never needed to look at again. There were moments across those 25 years when the wall sent a small ache through the house, and I learned to walk past each one. There was the school assignment, when Hannah was 8, where the children were asked to draw their family tree, and Hannah came home puzzled about the branch with no face on it. There was my son's wedding, where I caught myself counting, for just a second, the people who were not there. There was every single time another woman my age mentioned, lightly, casually, taking her mother to lunch. Each of those moments was a small knock on the wall, and each time I told myself the same thing, that the wall was protecting something more important than a lunch, that the ache was the price of safety, and that I had agreed to pay it long ago. I had a whole quiet practice, built over decades, of feeling that particular ache and then setting it down. I did not know, until the receipt, how much I had trained myself not to feel. And then I was sitting in Hannah's car with that slip of paper, and the certainty cracked. The receipt itself was nothing. A gas station, a fill-up, a coffee. What stopped me was where and how often. The gas station was in a small town about 2 hours from Birmingham, and I knew that town. I knew it because it was the town my mother had moved to, years ago. My daughter's car had been fueled up, recently, on the edge of the town where my estranged mother lived. And as I sat there, I did the thing you do. I started checking. The glove box. The other door pocket. The little folder of paperwork under the seat. And I found more receipts. Gas, a pharmacy, a diner, a grocery store, all from that same small town, scattered across what I could see were many months. My daughter had not driven to that town once. She had been driving there, quietly, regularly, for a long time. And there is only one person in that town that Hannah could possibly be going to see. I made myself look at the dates, spreading the receipts across the passenger seat in the order the faint printing gave me. The oldest was from about 4 years back. The most recent was from 11 days ago. And in between, a steady, faithful scatter, not every week, but close to every month, year after year after year. This was not a daughter who had visited her grandmother once out of curiosity and come away. This was a relationship. A real, sustained, 4-year relationship conducted entirely in the blank space my silence had left, 2 hours up the highway and 2 hours back, and folded up small in a car door so that her mother would never find it. I sat there and felt two things fighting in my chest. One of them was the sting of being deceived by my own child. But the other one, quieter and harder to look at, was a question I could not push away. What had Hannah found, out there, that had been worth 4 years of secret driving? What was in that town that my daughter had decided was worth keeping? I sat in that car and I did not start it. I just sat, because the wall I had maintained for 25 years was not, it turned out, a wall around my whole family. It was a wall around me, and my own daughter, without ever telling me, had been walking around the end of it. I did not confront Hannah angrily. I want to be honest that the impulse was there, the hot, immediate sense of betrayal, the my own daughter behind my back. But I am 56, and I have learned that the hot version of a conversation almost never gets you the truth. So I waited until I returned her car, and I sat down with her, and I put the handful of receipts on the table between us, gently, and I said, "Hannah, I think you've been going to see your grandmother. I'm not angry. I just need you to tell me the truth." And my daughter looked at the receipts, and her face did something complicated, relief and fear at the same time, and then she told me. She told me everything. She told me that about 4 years ago, as an adult, with her own questions about the grandmother-shaped hole in her childhood, she had quietly tracked Lorraine down. She had driven out to that small town, alone, not knowing what she would find, half expecting the monster the silence had implied, and she had kept going back. For 4 years, my daughter had been visiting my mother, every few weeks, 2 hours each way, and she had never told me because she knew what it would do to me, and because she had not been able to find a way to say it that did not feel like a betrayal. She had carried that secret for 4 years to spare me. And then she said the sentence that changed the direction of everything. She said, "Mom, she's not who you think she is anymore. She's not who she was." I asked Hannah the question that was burning in me, and I tried to keep the hurt out of my voice, and I mostly failed. I asked her why. Why had she gone looking at all, when she had been raised to understand that this was a closed door, when she knew what it would do to me? And my daughter's answer humbled me. She said that the closed door was exactly the reason. She said that growing up with a deliberately faceless grandmother had left a real and specific hole in her, a question she had carried since childhood, and that, as an adult, she had decided she had the right to answer her own question, even if the answer turned out to be ugly. She said gently that my decision to cut Lorraine off had been mine to make, and that she respected it, and that it had protected her childhood. But she said that I had made that decision for myself and for a toddler, and that the toddler was a grown woman now, and that a grown woman gets to decide for herself who she will and will not know. She was not wrong. I had frozen not only my mother in time, I had, without noticing, frozen my children's permission to have their own relationships, as though they would be toddlers needing my protection forever. Hannah had simply, quietly, grown up and gone to meet her own grandmother as an adult is allowed to do. I want to tell you what Hannah told me, sitting at that table, about the mother I had not laid eyes on in 25 years. She did not tell me that I had been wrong about Lorraine. That is important, and Hannah was careful about it, and I have come to love her for that care. She did not say, "Your mother was never cruel, you imagined it, you should feel guilty." My daughter looked at me and said that she believed me, that she had no doubt the mother I described, the sharp and belittling woman, had been real, and that what was done to me had been real. But she said that the woman she had been visiting for 4 years was not that woman anymore. She told me that Lorraine was old now, and frail, and largely alone, and that somewhere, across the 25 years of our silence, my mother had done something I had never imagined her capable of. She had changed. Hannah told me that Lorraine, in her old age, had become reflective in a way she never was before, that she spoke about her failures as a mother openly, without being asked and without excusing them, that she had once said to Hannah plainly, "I was not kind to your mother, and I have had a long time to understand exactly what that cost her, and I do not blame her for the silence." Hannah told me that Lorraine kept a photograph of me as a young woman, in her living room. That she asked about me, carefully, every visit, not to send a message, not to manipulate, just to know. My daughter told me that the woman in that small town was not waiting to hurt me again. She was an old woman living with the full and unflinching knowledge of the harm she had done, and quietly hoping, without any expectation, that she might be allowed to say so before she died. Hannah told me one detail that I have not been able to set down since. She said that on her very first visit, 4 years ago, when she had nervously introduced herself at Lorraine's door, my mother had not assumed anything. She had not said, "Oh, my granddaughter, come in," as if she were owed the visit. Instead, Hannah said, Lorraine had stood in her doorway and asked, carefully, almost fearfully, whether I knew Hannah had come, and whether Hannah was sure she wanted to be there, given everything she must have been told. My mother's first instinct, faced with the grandchild she had not seen since toddlerhood, had been to check that the visit would not cause me pain, and to give Hannah a clear chance to turn around and leave. That was not the woman from the house I grew up in. The woman from that house did not check whether things caused other people pain. Somewhere in 25 years, the person who could not admit a wound existed had become a person whose first move was to ask about everyone else's. I did not know what to do with that. I only knew it was not nothing. I want to be honest about the days after that conversation, because they were not simple, and the easy version would be a lie. The first thing I felt was not warmth. The first thing I felt was something closer to anger, and it took me a while to understand it, and when I did, it shamed me a little. I was angry because the news was inconvenient. For 25 years, I had been able to live inside a clean story. My mother was cruel. I had escaped her. The end. That story let me be settled. And Hannah had just walked in and complicated it, had told me that the antagonist of my life had quietly become someone else while I was not looking, and now I was going to have to do something with that, and I did not want to. It is an ugly thing to admit, but there is a real comfort in a grudge that has hardened into certainty, and I did not want mine disturbed. But underneath the anger was the thing I could not get away from, the thing Hannah's visits had proven. People can change. I had built 25 years on a frozen photograph of my mother, Lorraine at her worst, Lorraine at 50, the sharp woman in the house I grew up small in. And I had assumed, the way we all assume, that the photograph was permanent, that the person in it was fixed there forever. But people are not photographs. They keep going after the picture is taken. And while I had been confidently hating a 50-year-old woman, that woman had spent 25 more years living and aging and reckoning, and had slowly become an 80-year-old woman I had never met. My certainty was not wrong about the past. It was just badly, dangerously out of date. I did not rush. I want to say that because I think it matters, and because I do not want this to sound like a story where a receipt fixes everything in an afternoon. It did not. I sat with it for weeks. I talked to Hannah many times. And what finally moved me was a simple, hard piece of arithmetic. My mother is old. Whatever was going to be possible between us, the window for it was not large, and it was closing, a little, every month. I could keep my wall perfectly intact, and I could be, in a few years, a woman standing at her mother's grave, having never once tested whether the person Hannah described was real. Or I could go and find out for myself. There was one more thing that moved me, and it was Hannah. My daughter had carried this secret for 4 years, driving 2 hours each way, holding the weight of a relationship she could not share with her own mother, all to spare me. And I understood that if I kept the wall up now, knowing what I knew, I would be asking Hannah to keep carrying it, to keep choosing, for the rest of our lives, between her grandmother and an honest word to her mother. My silence had never only cost me, it had quietly handed my daughter a burden, and the kindest thing I could now do for Hannah was to make the secret unnecessary. And I realized that if I chose the wall, I would not really be choosing it to protect myself anymore. I would be choosing it to protect my story. And a story is not a good enough reason to refuse to look at your own dying mother. So I went. Hannah offered to come, and I told her no, not because I did not want her there, but because I understood that this first walk around the end of the wall had to be mine. I drove the 2 hours myself. I will not pretend I was not terrified. I was 56 years old, driving toward the woman who had made me feel small for the first 30 years of my life, and every mile of that drive, my body remembered being a child in her house. My mother opened her door, and I saw immediately that Hannah had told the truth. The woman in that doorway was old, genuinely old, and small now herself, in a way that rearranged something in me before either of us said a word, because I had been braced for the towering figure of my childhood, and instead, here was a frail, elderly woman holding her own doorframe for balance. And she looked at me, and her face did not do any of the things I had spent the drive dreading. It did not sharpen, it did not find fault. It simply, slowly, crumpled. And my mother said, in a voice with no edge left in it at all, "Sandy, I did not think you would ever come." And then she said the second thing, quickly, as if she had been holding it ready for years in case she ever got the chance. She said, "Before anything else, I owe you an apology, and I am not going to make you ask for it." I had braced on that long drive for so many versions of that doorway. I had braced for the sharp version, the one who would find something wrong with me before I was fully out of the car. I had braced for a wounded, manipulative version, one who would weaponize her own frailty. I had even braced, in a cowardly corner of my mind, for her simply not to be home, which would have let me drive away having technically tried. What I had not braced for, what I had not even thought to prepare for in 25 years of imagining this woman, was the possibility that she would be ready. That she would have spent so long expecting this moment, and dreading it, and hoping for it, that she had the apology already shaped and waiting, so that I would never have to do the unbearable thing of asking my own mother to admit she had hurt me. Her being ready told me more than the apology itself did. You do not get ready like that by accident. You get ready like that by thinking about a person, with regret, for years. We sat in her small living room, and yes, my photograph was there, just as Hannah had said. And my mother apologized to me. And I have thought a great deal since about why that apology landed the way it did, when I had spent 25 years sure that no apology from her could ever matter. It landed because it was not an excuse wearing an apology's clothes. My mother did not tell me she had done her best. She did not tell me her own childhood had been hard, though I happen to know it was. She did not ask me to understand her. She simply named what she had done, the coldness, the belittling, the specific ways she had made me feel like a disappointment, named it accurately, as though she had spent years studying it, which I now believe she had. And then she said that she had come to understand, too late, that I had not cut her off out of cruelty, but out of a mother's love for her own children, and that she did not hold the 25 years against me. She said the silence had been, in her words, the bill, and a fair one. My mother had spent a quarter of a century not waiting for me to come back so she could defend herself. She had spent it becoming a person who finally understood why I left. I am not going to tell you that we fell into each other's arms and 25 years dissolved. That is not what happened, and if I told you it was, I would be selling you something false. What happened is smaller and truer than that. I have a mother again, a complicated, late, carefully rebuilt relationship with a very old woman, and it is not the warm, lifelong bond I never got to have, because that bond is simply gone, and no reunion resurrects it. The little girl in that house did not get a kind mother, and she never will, and I have had to grieve that even as I drove home from a genuinely good visit. But the woman I am now is something the little girl never had. I have an honest, gentle, unhurried connection with the 80-year-old my mother became. We talk on the phone, I visit, openly now, no receipts hidden in any door. It is late, and it is partial, and it is real, and I have learned that late and partial and real is worth a great deal more than a clean and total nothing. My younger brother, when I told him all of this, did not come along on the journey, and I want to mention that because it is part of the honest picture. He has his own frozen photograph of our mother, and his is still serving him, and he has chosen for now to keep his wall where it is. And I have made my peace with that too. I am not the missionary of this reunion. I do not believe everyone who was hurt by Lorraine is obligated to walk back around the wall just because I did. The change in her is real, but it does not create a debt in the people she harmed. What I have learned is only this. The door being openable is not the same as the door having to be opened, and each person who is hurt gets to decide for themselves, on their own timeline, with no pressure from me. My brother may go one day. He may not. Either way, he is allowed. The receipt gave me back a choice. It did not give me the right to make anyone else's. A year has passed now. I have started, slowly, to repair something else too. My own habit of certainty. For 25 years, I prided myself on being a decisive woman, a woman who, once she had judged a situation, did not waver. I see now that what I called decisiveness was sometimes just an unwillingness to ever look again. I am trying, at 56, to hold my conclusions a little more loosely, to remember that a verdict reached with good information can still quietly expire, and that checking again is not weakness. It is one more thing my mother's late change has taught me, which is a strange gift to receive from the very person I spent my life sure I had nothing left to learn from. My children have a grandmother, openly, for whatever time is left, and there is a particular thing about that which moves me more than I expected. My mother gets, at the very end of her life, to be a different kind of elder to my children than she was a parent to me. She is gentle with them. She is interested in them. They are getting the version of Lorraine that I never got, and watching that, I find, does not make me bitter. It makes me think that this, maybe, is what a person's late change is actually for. Not to undo the past. The past is not undoable, but to make sure that the harm stops with the generation it stopped with, and that the people coming up behind get the better later version. I keep one of those receipts. The first one, the gas station one, the one I unfolded in Hannah's sunlit car. I have it in a small frame on a shelf, and people who notice it assume there is a sentimental story behind the frame, some treasured ticket from a wedding or a trip. I let them assume it. The real story is harder to say in passing. The real story is that for 25 years, I believed I had the whole truth about my mother, and that a tank of gas and a coffee, bought by my daughter at the edge of a town I had refused to think about, knew more about my family than I did. It is the least sentimental object imaginable, a faded little slip of paper for a tank of gas and a coffee. But I keep it because it is the thing that walked me around the end of my own wall, and because it reminds me that my daughter, at 20-some years old, understood something it took me until 56 to learn, that you do not have to keep a door shut forever just because you were right to shut it once. I want to leave you with the two things this taught me. The first is about the photographs we keep of people. When someone hurts us badly enough that we cut them out of our lives, we do something without realizing it. We freeze them. We take a photograph of them at their worst, and we file it away. And from that moment on, in our minds, that is who they are, permanently, unchangeably. And it is a completely natural thing to do. But it is not always a true thing to keep, because the person walked out of the frame the moment the picture was taken, and they kept living, and people, even difficult people, even people who hurt you, can spend years changing in ways you will never see if you have decided the photograph is the whole truth. I am not telling you to reopen every door. Some doors should stay shut, and some people do not change, and protecting yourself is not a sin. I am only asking you to remember that the photograph in your head is dated, sometimes by decades, and that you do not actually know who a person is now unless you have looked. The second thing is about being right, and how comfortable it can become. I was right to protect my children from my mother. That was a sound and loving decision, and I would make it again. But somewhere over 25 years, being right slowly turned into something else. It turned into a settled, comfortable certainty that I did not want disturbed, even by good news. When Hannah told me my mother had changed, my first feeling was annoyance, because the news threatened my tidy story. I am asking you to watch for that in yourself. If the news that someone has changed makes you feel not hope but irritation, that is worth noticing. It may mean that somewhere along the way, you stopped holding your grudge because it protected you and started holding it because it had simply become who you are. And a person is allowed to put that down. Even late. Even at 56, in a sunlit car with a receipt in her hand. If this story landed for you, drop the word receipt in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. Subscribe for new stories. Real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. First, the person you cut off is not frozen at the moment you cut them. When we end a relationship to protect ourselves, we tend to keep a fixed image of the other person. Them at their worst, them on the day we left, and we quietly assume that image stays accurate forever. It does not. People keep living after you stop watching, and some of them, given years, genuinely change. You are allowed to keep a door shut. But be honest that you may be shutting it against a person who no longer exists, and that the only way to truly know who someone is today is to have looked at them today. Second, notice when being right has hardened into being unwilling. There is nothing wrong with having been right to protect yourself, but a justified grudge can quietly outlive its job and become simple identity, a settled story you defend not because you still need it, but because it has become comfortable. The test is simple. When you hear that the person who hurt you has changed for the better, do you feel a flicker of hope or a flicker of irritation? If it is irritation, look closely. You may be guarding a wall that has finished protecting you and is now only keeping you company. People rarely stay who they were. I'll see you next time.